parts of your body, right? And that could be the gut, that could be in many of the abdominopelvic areas. So it's an estrogen-based condition, and so there have been studies showing exactly, you know, how you can change your estrogen through food, right? And through your microbiome. And so, for example, you can actually increase estrogen, which would not be good for endometriosis, right? So you worsen inflammation, you worsen endometriosis if you eat a lot of red meat, dairy, and fat, especially saturated fat. But you can actually increase, or I should say decrease inflammation and improve endometriosis, modulating estrogen through plants. So there are plants again, and you know, lots of plants, polyphenols, different vitamins C, D, and E, and seaweed. So those are some of the things that have been specifically studied. When you eat them, they help modulate estrogen and help endometriosis. Other reasons we know endometriosis, you know, has a connection with the gut is actually there are a lot of studies showing you can treat and improve endometriosis with antibiotics, and that's another gut connection. And the final one is with estrogen is the way that estrogen is made and then secreted through the body. It leaves your body through the biliary tract and then into your gut. And some of those gut microbes they do something fancy called deconjugate estrogen, so that you actually you will pick it up instead of excreting it. You're going to absorb it, and your estrogen levels go up. So your microbiome is directly a part of the process of your estrogen levels and what is excreted and what is reabsorbed. And the last thing I was going to touch on is thyroid, because thyroid conditions are so common. I see a ton of Hashimoto's specifically, and you know, the big connection there is gluten, leaky gut, and Hashimoto's, right? So we know that, you know, gluten is a very difficult to digest protein. You know, in America especially, where there are a lot of pesticides, and there have been a lot of studies showing that there is a connection between gluten and leaky gut, which is a colloquial term for increased intestinal permeability, which basically means, you know, you have the kind of lumen of your gut, you have the middle of your gut, that's where the food is, that's where the microbiome is. Then you kind of have the mucus layer, and then you have the gut wall, right? So that barrier is so important. It's keeping whatever you put in your gut. Let's say you're putting Fruit Loops in your gut, right? Like, you better have an intact barrier, or else all that terrible like food coloring and food dye can actually leak from inside your gut into the wall of your gut, activating your immune system, right? Because that's where your immune system is. Your immune system is in the wall of the gut. So this idea is like, you eat a ton of gluten, especially as a kid, especially processed gluten, of course. And so, you know, you're kind of breaking down this barrier with time. You can actually now measure your gut permeability, right? But the idea is like, your immune system is getting bombarded. And again, just like with the microbiome, there's a tipping point, right? So at some point, your immune system is so dysregulated that you develop autoimmune disease, right? And so the really famous one is Hashimoto's, where, you know, again, it's a specific thyroid condition. So, you know, and it's hard. A lot of patients talk to me like, okay, well, like, now that I have it, like, let's turn it off. Well, that's really hard, right? The idea is like, once the microbiome and that dysregulated immune system, like, it's called an epigenetic factor, which is a fancy way of saying, like, it's like a key. Like, it turns on a process like autoimmunity in your body, and that process is turned on. So then you just have to work as hard as you can to decrease that autoimmune reaction, right? Decrease the inflammation, but that autoimmune process has been turned on, right? So it's there, but, you know, you could put it into remission and be in remission your whole life. So I would say that's kind of, those are the three main areas of hormones that I find really fascinating, where the intersection between gut health and hormones kind of happen.
And I was going to say, should we talk maybe a little bit about inflammation, just put it in as a sort of like rise support for gut health?
Sure. So specifically, you know, as far as inflammation is concerned, you know, for me, when I look at the gut, that's one of the main things I want to look at, because again, inflammation can come from so many things. You could be taking a week of NSAIDs like Aleve or Motrin ibuprofen because you hurt your ankle, and then the next thing you know, you have an ulcer in your stomach because you've increased inflammation, you've broken down the mucus barrier, you have leaky gut. It's all connected, right? So inflammation is a specific cellular response in the gut to something, right? And so again, the important thing is to understand why you have it, and then the other one is to measure it, right? And the biggest way, that I do it is endoscopy and colonoscopy. I actually am in there biopsying, seeing the ulcers, seeing like the actual, there are certain kind of cardinal ways of looking at inflammation. It's red, it's hot, like there are things to think about, and that's how it looks like in the gut. It looks red, it looks bad, it looks scary, and ulcers, right? So I'll turn it over to Alicia if you have other comments on inflammation, but the last thing that also a lot of questions came in about was perimenopause and menopause, so take it away.
My favorite topic, okay. So just along going with what Elena said, it is so interesting. There's a lot of research right now. It is a hot topic. I just came back from the Menopause Society conference in Philadelphia, where we had like the best researchers talking about what the future holds. And there's a lot of robust research talking about the gut microbiome and how it regulates our sex hormones. And so it's interesting, you can actually see that the gut microbiome changes when you go from being premenopausal to postmenopausal. And because of that estrogen decrease, it actually, the gut microbiome of postmenopausal women looks more similar to like a male gut microbiome. So what can we do about this? One of the things that is so important for women that are midlife or menopausal is fiber. Plant fiber is so beneficial for a couple of reasons. When you eat plant fiber, that fiber is metabolized by the gut microbiome that Elena was talking about. It converts this fiber into what's called short-chain fatty acids, and those short-chain fatty acids regulate sex hormones and estrogen, by the way she was talking about, released through the bile duct. So it's not like if you eat a ton of fiber, your estrogen will immediately go up. But there is a really key component in regulating your hormones by eating fiber. We know that they're very connected, and there just needs to be more research in that. The other thing that why fiber is really important for women in midlife is because it helps to regulate satiety by a mechanism through GLP-1. So when you eat fiber, the gut bacteria metabolize it again into short-chain fatty acids. Same thing, those short-chain fatty acids regulate a hormone called GLP-1, which might sound familiar because it's the hormone that those medications like Ozempic try to mimic. And so for my patients who don't want to go on to something like Ozempic, I say eat a lot of fiber. I usually recommend more than what the American Dietary Association recommends. I don't know what you recommend, like 30, at least 35, 40, and you kind of have to ease into it. But one of the best sources of fiber, because it is hard to obtain that amount of fiber in your daily life unless you're really eating mostly plant vegetables or beans and lentils. So a cup of cooked beans is going to be about 12 to 15 grams of fiber. So I always tell my patients, beans and lentils are your best friend in midlife and menopause, as well as plant fiber. And then the other thing that is really helpful for women in midlife in terms of talking about inflammation is vitamin D. Vitamin D is very anti-inflammatory. A lot of women are deficient in it, especially those of us on the East Coast who always have are covered and wear sunscreen on our face. You can get it through supplementation. I always try to encourage getting it through real food if possible. So some of the big sources of vitamin D are fatty fish, and eggs, and basically fatty fish really is the biggest source of vitamin D. Yeah.
Can you touch on the difference between D and D3?
Yeah, so D2 comes from plants, and D3 is more animal or fish vitamin D3. D3 tends to be sort of the ideal one that you want. It is more potent, and it's just more potent. So usually we want you to get D3, yeah.
So if you're going to take a supplement at our weight, how many milligrams a day?
You really can't overdose on D3. So I recommend 800 to 1,000 international units of D, at least. Yeah.
So my question is, before you were talking about these insulin resistance, and how less carbs is kind of better for that. But a lot of plants, especially beans and lentils,
True.
they have a lot of carbs.
That's true, that's true. So it really, not all carbs are bad. It really, if, it's a good point. So the question was, if I'm saying that if you're insulin resistant, you want to try to eat less carbs or carbs at the end, but I'm talking about eating beans, which are very high in carbs, is true. So a lot of the carbs in that is going to be actually dietary fiber, which doesn't actually get absorbed like sugar. So when you talk about whole grains, because of the amount of fiber in plants and carbs, it doesn't spike your sugar or insulin the way that a refined processed starch would. So you can actually eat this even if you're insulin resistant. And so yeah, so it really just depends on the type of carb. There's a very big difference between refined starchy carbs and whole grains like lentils and beans. They really are very satiating. They don't spike your glucose the way like a refined, the way pasta or bread would. So I think we're going to do our, okay, so then Elena and I planned a little quick fire of like questions or topic, hot items. Let me see where's mine. Okay, Elena, garlic.
Okay, so really quickly, okay, garlic is probably my favorite because it is both antibacterial and antifungal. So it really does keep bacteria and fungi away, especially if you have bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth. Oh, actually, let me ask you, soy.
Soy is, okay, so soy, it's very confusing because soy is considered a phytoestrogen. So people think, oh, it's pro-estrogenic. If I eat a lot of soy, it's going to help with hot flashes. It's confusing. I can explain the physiology if someone wants me to, but I started to, and my nurse Sarah was like, please don't talk about that. So the bottom line is it really depends on the person because your phytoestrogens like soy can act pro-estrogenic, but they can also act anti-estrogenic. The bottom line is, one, they're not dangerous in women who are at risk for breast cancer. They are not going to increase your risk of breast cancer. They could potentially be helpful if you are someone who responds to phytoestrogens, but to see it and test it out, you basically need a cup of unprocessed soy to see if it's helpful. 1 cup a day is really what the studies show can be helpful in some women, so it's very personal, but it's not dangerous. So if it's not dangerous, it may or may not help with hot flashes. Elena, apple cider vinegar.
Okay. So apple cider vinegar is, specifically the raw one with the mother in it, which is where the real live probiotics are. Colloquially, a lot of people get relief from acid reflux. There's not been a study that shows that, but a lot of people do. The other thing that it is good for is in people who have low acid states, right? A lot of times we talk about high acid versus low acid. Of course, for example, if you've been taking Nexium for years, you're in a low acid state, your digestion may need a little boost of acid, and so get it from apple cider vinegar, and also very good antifungal. Let's see, myo-inositol.
Myo-inositol, a great supplement for women with insulin resistance or PCOS. So myo-inositol is a glycan, which is a type of sugar that is found in fruit and beans, and we're still elucidating sort of what came first, but what we've realized is that women with insulin resistance, especially PCOS, have very low levels of myo-inositol, and you need this ratio to be like 40-to-1. Myo-inositol is important to maintain integrity of the cell wall in all the cells of your body. So women with insulin resistance have very low levels of myo-inositol, and we think that that's involved in why they are insulin resistant. So does taking myo-inositol actually result in improved insulin sensitivity? It actually does. There have been quite a few studies that have shown that taking myo-inositol supplements can help with patients to maintain their glucose levels and stable levels and maintain and become more insulin sensitive. So myo-inositol, yes. Okay. I think we're like ending now. Yeah, okay. So, yeah. All right, so I know we talked a lot. That went by really fast. Sorry, I love this topic clearly. But if anyone has any questions, happy to take questions.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And so we also just have a quick handout that we will leave at the front, right, Sarah? I guess. So we'll leave it at the front. So just a couple interesting tips about using food as medicine. I think one of the things that come up a lot to me are, people talk about, oh, is the raw, being on a raw diet, is that actually good for you? Some people try it, they're hungry all the time. So there's a little breakdown of there are actually vegetables that are better for you raw or better for you cooked. And so kind of like how to navigate that, the 3 Ps. Yeah.
So, the takeaway for me tonight was that I watched the 5 Blue Zones. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So the takeaway was really community, but plant-based foods.
Yes.
For centenarians,
Yes.
like worldwide.
Yep.
The most concentrated in that is what they found, right?
Yep.
Their diet was plant-based.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's what we're going with, most healthiest.
Yeah. So, all those carnivores. It's okay to be an omnivore, but you don't want to be a carnivore, exclusively, right? That's not going to feed your microbiome. So, the Blue Zone book, the Netflix show, all of those are really great in showing, for example, how in Okinawa, right, they live on starch, like purple potatoes and, sweet potatoes and soy. So, a lot of people are worried about soy, but when you see what's going on around the world where people are living to 100, they're living on plants. And of course, their loved ones and having a good social connection.
And I would add too, like focusing on all the cool properties of food and just incorporating more plants as opposed to like what you shouldn't be eating is having a positive mindset of like, oh cool, I can add this and add this. I just sort of tell patients, don't worry about what you're not supposed to be. Just try to include a bunch of variety of colors, a bunch of variety of plants, and maybe rethink your proportions of sort of the veggies are half of your plate or more, and that's just a good way to start. It doesn't have to be so complicated. Yeah.
What about turmeric?
Turmeric's great. That was on our hot list. Turmeric is anti-inflammatory, filled with antioxidants. It's a super spice. Yeah. Also, I'll just really quickly for insulin resistance, there is data to show that cinnamon, a teaspoon of cinnamon a day, so it's kind of a hefty amount, but cinnamon is very anti-inflammatory, loaded with antioxidants and good for insulin resistance, as well as berberine. You might have heard of that. So berberine is a root, difficult to find in food. 500 milligrams a day prior to each meal can also help with insulin resistance.
Do you have a question?
Can I share what I do? I've been a writer for
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will stretch all the way there, so.